I call Tracy Martin.
Mr Chair, thank you very much. I'm ecstatic to rise on Clause 2, and particularly around the part of Clause 2 that my learned colleague from the Labour Party has started us down. And I think he's raised a very, very good point there about the fact that nobody can assume that any legislation will pass. And obviously, one of the reasons for the start date or the beginning date of this legislation is because one of the things that the government, I'm sure, wants to do, and one of the reasons that the party supporting this bill wants to do, is to make sure that those telcos have the widest possible opportunity to amend their budgets, to make sure that the levy that is in place, that they know has been in place since 2011, is going to continue till 2020. So we want to give them a strong lead-in on that, sir, because nobody wants to actually negatively affect those telcos and the way they do their business. Also, the Minister made a point about that as soon as we know where the money is going to come from, there are other conversations that can take place around the provision and who's going to do this and that and the other. But I actually want to go back to the point that Mr Hipkins raised, and that is around royal assent. And I think it's a very, very valid point. And for me personally, it's one of those reasons why New Zealand should never become a republic, and I think it's one of the strongest reasons that New Zealand should never become a republic. Just imagine, sir, with this piece of legislation and the start date that is required. Now, let's imagine that it wasn't in the best interest of the country. Let's just imagine that for a moment. And with a start date such as this, where it requires royal assent to begin, then the Governor-General can actually refuse to sign it. Now, and so until the Governor-General signs it, on behalf of Queen Elizabeth, a very fine woman who I personally admire, until the Governor-General signs it, it does not become the law of the land. So therefore, if this was not a bill, and New Zealand First is obviously supporting it, we believe it is a bill that is in the best interest of the country, but if this was not a bill that was in the best interest of the country, that one little clause around the start date, around royal assent, actually saves the country. It's the last backstop to bad decisions by this House. So I'm not sure that that's where Mr Hipkins wanted to go with his contribution, but from a New Zealand First perspective, or from my perspective specifically, this particular clause is incredibly important. And that piece around royal assent, that keeps us safe. One of the things we must never get rid of with regard to start dates and pieces of legislation is that royal assent, so that is our last protection for bad legislation. The Governor-General can decide not to sign any legislation. People might decide to do away with the Governor-General, but until he signs it, it cannot be put into place. So I agree with Mr Hipkins that is a very, very important clause. More members of the government should stand and take calls on that particular clause, because I believe that they obviously would support it, support the start date being on Monday, possibly, or Tuesday, if the Governor-General has appointments. Oh, well, there you go. You see, it may not get out of the House by then, but the moment it gets to the Governor-General, he will make a decision as to whether it is in the best interest of this country, and we all know what a fine man the Governor-General is. All of us trust the Governor-General and his judgment. So therefore, sir, that clause, again, it's a very, very important clause inside this piece of legislation. Kia ora.
I will give a member the call. I'd just like to make the point that we have well traversed royal assent, even in various European countries, by the Governor-General as well as the Queen and the King of Belgium. So I look forward to the next speaker cutting a fresh track on this very narrow clause, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Now,